Welcome everybody to the Deepwatch Overwatch podcast. What we want to do is really just kind of have a really solid, fun conversation on security topics, what we've seen within the industry over the last year, and a couple things that we as a group want to talk about that our prospects, our customers, anyone really in security at the C level, from a CISO to a CIO, or even down to a SOC manager, may find of interest. And we'll hit a couple major topics and see where the conversation goes. I guess in order to start this thing off, I don't know if we want to introduce ourselves or what.
So Neal, is this the inaugural?
This is the 0.5 version.
It's still in beta.
Yeah. This may be the one and only if we don't make this thing right. So.
Are we breaking the fourth wall? Is that what did you look directly?
I guess camera? I just broke it. It's
okay.
Fine. You can call me Deadpool. I'm good with that. That's okay.
That's fine.
Whose idea was this?
You're welcome.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, no, it's not. Well, this goes back years, but so I guess in all seriousness, let's talk a little bit of like what happened last year. Like what were obviously there were some major factors, major things that occurred, but any one of them top of mind that and actually PO, because you're on the end, what do you have? Like, what do you think was the biggest ones?
I mean, overall, more breaches, more vulnerabilities, more 0 days, more of everything bad, right? And not a lot of good. If you look at even security-centric vendors out there, password managers, authentication mechanisms, the biggest of the big, Microsoft, with their key issues, erodes trust with the consumer base, and cybersecurity is as big a topic now as it ever has been. And I think it continues to grow. And I think we're going to continue to see these challenges, even stuff that's, 20, 30 years old. Patching is still a problem. Vulnerability management, firewalls, remote access, right? These things continue to creep up and continue to cause challenges for enterprises, organizations.
I have to say, on the patch management, the patching front, it blew me away that are we 1 year or 2 years from Log4j? Is it only 1 year?
No, we're longer than that.
It's 2 years. Okay,
We're going on 2 now.
According to scans of the internet facing Log4j instances, somewhere right around 38% of them are still vulnerable. Is that that blows my mind, right? Does that mean that 38% of those should be owned by somebody, or I wonder if the industry overblew that vulnerability a little bit. Maybe it wasn't.
There's still a bunch of Xboxes out there that haven't been patched. Some Minecraft servers.
2 out of 5 CISOs.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a big one from that perspective to me. Also, I think, speaking of the big, I don't know if I can call this one a vendor oopsie, because I think a huge part of this was implementation as well. The fallout from MoveIt.
Yeah.
One of the huge things that blew me away around that one is that was one of the biggest, I'll call it fourth party data breach events. So your company may not have even had a MoveIt appliance. You may not have directly communicated with somebody else's MoveIt appliance, but somewhere down the way, a vendor of yours, so now we're at like third and to fourth party, lost a whole bunch of data off of MoveIt, off of a compromised MoveIt system that turned out to be healthcare data, PHI data for your employees.
Yeah.
And without organizations coming back and telling you about it, you actually had no idea, unless you had people on staff to go look at raw dumps out on the dark web.
Yeah. And every vendor now has a supply chain of other vendors, right? Who they use for critical data storage, critical data moving, no pun intended. We saw,
good topic.
We saw more supply chain attacks last year, supply chain of supply chain, with 3CX, which was a nasty supply chain attack sourced from Lazarus Group. And the MoveIt attack prior, Excellion, who we did some great work with GuidePoint on here at Deepwatch. So, I think those supply chain attacks are going to increase as the maturity of the attacker groups increases.
And creativity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they have to get more creative. As we as defenders get more creative and get more mature, the bar is set higher for them. So they're going to find new ways to get in always.
And I think you brought up a good point on kind of the attack on the customer of the customer, right? The supply side of this. Like we saw the credit union one that just hit towards the end of last year, right here. It was like, oh, well, we're hit this particular provider, which handled 44 different credit unions across the U.S. that got adversely impacted and lost all of their capabilities for that day. But also something, you mentioned some older stuff. One that I saw the other day that in a report we're putting out. Like, do you guys know that Mariah is still like a number 9 or number 10 reported piece of malware from the internet these days?
Yeah.
Like,
I was not aware of that.
You don't remember Mariah?
I do, but I was not aware of that statistic.
Yeah, last update
This
I
is
saw.
the aging issue we have with so many things.
Yeah. I mean, last I saw was Krebs put he wrote something about finding the person who put Mariah out there in 2018. So 5 years ago, he wrote a review of something from, what was it, 2012, 2011? But yet it's never goes away.
Yeah.
So
that code will be reused, right? Just like open source. Iced ID is another example that had a resurgence from 5 years ago, last year. The code base is the same, and they take the code, they reuse it, they package it into their ransomware, and you have ransomware as a service now that takes this code and builds it specifically for targeting a industry vertical. Small credit unions, for example, or a service provider that services those credit unions. And it's much harder to catch because it's targeted to those verticals.
Seems to me like we have the ability to acknowledge that there are still very much large issues in passwords, that we are still dealing with phishing in a grand scale, maybe more than we're willing to acknowledge or admit these days. And patching is still somewhat of a science, maybe an art for some folks, but it's still very much a gap in the space. And then I'd add the fourth P into it, which is the people aspect of things. The social engineering aspect of what's available to organizations is just it's concerning, especially at the executive layer.
It blows my mind that two of the largest breaches this year, certainly the ones with the most publicity and frankly the ones with the most dollar amount, I think, associated with them, were both executed primarily based on calling a help desk, convincing them not only to reset the password but to reset MFA to a new MFA device. Now, some of this is hearsay and everything else, but this is our best understanding of all of it. And this is the two attacks that basically owned every customer's data on the Strip in Las Vegas. The different reactions, by the way, by the two entities that both got hit were strikingly different, right? One said, "Oh, that ransom's affordable, we'll pay it." The other one said, "No, heck no. Why does nothing work for 3 weeks? What happened?" And both of those CISOs, to the best of my knowledge, still have their jobs.
Yeah.
Which I think is a change as well. Used to feel like you had that breach, congratulations, warm up the resume.
Yeah.
Not so much in 2023.
And that leads into the consistency, I think, that the SEC is trying to get with breach reporting, right? Are those both material breaches? How are they sourced? What type of information was stolen? And then the response to that, I think eventually as an industry, probably, I don't know, hopefully not with some government oversight, depending on your opinion there. We need to respond to these things in a consistent way, because if you have the same actor hitting two different folks and they take a completely opposite tack on how to respond, then we're never going to get past these ransomware attacks. We're never going to get past data breaches. I think advanced attacks are always going to be there, but these massive, large-scale attacks, we definitely need to get a handle on, and we won't do that until there's consistency in response action.
And to your point there, Pio, I mean, it is like we're coming back to like it's patching, right? It is. Log4j's been out there for forever. Maybe going to go back to Mariah, like it was a firmware update, so you wouldn't have to worry about being part of those activities. But it is we see these activities coming down, we see these breaches. What is the consistent response or the consistent verification that needs to be done after something does happen? And I mean, I'll ask this question for the group. Like, we have the changes to the SEC reporting on moving from 7 or whatever the number was down to 4 days. Like, do we see other things that may be coming down from a regulation perspective that could be impactful to prove the results or prove the activity versus just report on it?
You know, that's yeah. My crystal ball is rolling around here somewhere, uh, but I think this is going to be baby steps. I'm glad that the SEC is taking some action at this point, but I also, when I think of regulation, at least in cybersecurity, I think of that as an admission that as an industry we done screwed up, and this is regulators stepping in to go, you can't do that again. You can't let this continue on this way. So we're jumping in. I think I mean, I kind of joke about PCI. That is absolutely the hens guarding the hen house with regard to regulation, because when Uncle Sam was about to regulate the payment card industry from a cybersecurity perspective, they said, "Hang on, we'll regulate ourselves. See, here's all sorts of great stuff," and it's kind of security theater in its own way, unfortunately. I don't know that we're going to move on a lot further. I love a lot of what CISA has been doing, though, with regard to known exploited, must patch, some of those sorts of things. I'm hoping that those get some more traction. And sadly, the only way they're going to get great traction is probably if there are serious penalties for failing to comply. So it's going to take raking some folks over the coals before everybody else pays attention.
So this is the case of a publicly traded company, right? I mean, we also need to see the downstream effects of reporting standards of these types being extended to the planet, not just publicly traded companies. And I think that may be a blocker for the progress in that, in a way. But I think it is a good framework to start with. What I have not really seen is a lot of the discussion around this yet. I think it came out in maybe May last year was a public announcement.
Something
And so
like May, June timeframe.
Yeah, you're going on a good 8 months where I'm not really sure we've seen a market indicator yet from that announcement. But I do think the framework makes a lot of sense. The framework also causes CISOs and security leaders to have a plan for timeliness.
Right.
And I think that changes the psychology quite a bit of what's happening in the space.
It's no longer a best effort type of conversation or even due diligence type of conversation. It is either you do this or there are some consequences, whether that's financial, whether that's adjusting your organization,
whether that's being fined or potentially jailed,
criminal charges, right? For negligence. I mean, it really can get to that point, especially if you're in a business where human lives are at stake, or real world consequences can result as forceful negligence in your cybersecurity program.
So on that point, because I want to go back to something you were talking about earlier, Greg. We can look at filings, you can look at fiduciary requirements from the SEC or other pieces that are out there, but isn't there a way to say that we can prove due diligence, or should we be looking at ways of proving best effort, or that we've put things in place, or that we've taken the budget that we were provided and done as a CISO or as a CTO or CIO or SOC manager in dealing with tooling selections, that I've made the best selection I possibly could and that I've used it in the right way? Is there anything around that?
Oh, yeah, that's not a softball, by the way.
No, that's a tee and a softball.
So it's an interesting discussion, right? Because what you're really looking at, so we're going to switch this narrative from kind of the most creative threats and talking about that to really an economic set of indicators that we're starting to see, the financial implications of managing cybersecurity programs, the metrics that are driving these. I think that there's a couple of ways to look at this. So if you look at it in a layered perspective, what data is being gathered on the enterprise to protect it? What controls are in place? What systems have been purchased? And you kind of walk up the entire stack of spend. And there's a way to justify a maturity conversation as to what has been allocated and spent, and is it best of breed, right? We've had GMQs for a while. We know what fits in the wave. We know the best of breed products, and we certainly as practitioners know what we prefer. But when it comes to a breach in a report and an allocation of the conversation of did you do due diligence. There's also not a framework for that yet either. Will there be
No.
one? Maybe, but I think it also has to start with, the due diligence is going to come down to what decisions were made and what trade-offs were made. And I think the gray area is the trade-offs. That's where it gets really interesting. In our business, we look at ingestion of source types. We look at the overall visibility of infrastructure, the detection and response capabilities. When you choose to not invest, or you choose to not ingest in a data type, there is a trade-off for not having it, right? There's a financial trade-off. There's also a risk trade-off. And I think that there's so many layers to this. And as we study these breaches and we study the economic indicators of these breaches, one of the things that we all will agree upon on this panel is that the budgets magically start to appear, right?
Yes.
Yeah, see a lot of head nodding, right?
Yeah.
So we know that the implications are there, but what we have not yet studied is the metrics and the data of these fallout mechanisms, other than maybe shareholder value. It's hard to
Right.
put a number to.
I will say I think 23 was the year where we started to see a more financial business impact approach
Agreed.
to doing cybersecurity budgets. Not that the budgets are disappearing, but I think they level off. And I think personally, I saw a lot more of, hey, you don't get a blank check anymore if there's a breach.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to hold you accountable because you've been doing this. You've been a CISO here for 7 years. You've built a program, and this proves that the door was left wide open.
Yeah.
Right. So the blank check isn't there.
We've also talked a lot about the CISO having a seat at the board table, right?
Yeah.
The SEC reporting kind of pushes that a little bit further. But I think one of the things that I saw, to your point as well, the financial impetus of 2023 is the economic shrink of available spend. The kind of the shrink of the economy has hit a lot of different folks. And I believe the net effect of that is that we're seeing CISOs having to work a lot more closely with CFOs on the spend, the strategy, the risk allocation of the business, the lowering of the risk, and the trade-offs and sign-offs on risk acceptance. And I think that's very healthy. If there's anything we got from 2023 is that maybe the CISO at the board table is the way in which we discussed it needing to be. The way in which it happened is economic in impact, making that conversation happen.
I think it's been a crash course for a lot of security leadership this year in business risk and business economics. Blowing away the way we were doing it before, and it's something that as an industry we've needed to do forever. We're getting drug kicking and screaming into that. It's a good thing that we're going there. Wish we had been more proactive as an industry on that front.
Well, to your point on being proactive, on kind of being drugged to more of a standardized piece, and to your point on budgets kind of not necessarily staying static, they are moving a little bit, but not getting the blank check upon the breach, or having to frankly be called in for your midterm grades. Like, what, you've had time with this, what did you do with it? A lot of what I'm starting to see, or even really kind of saw last year happening coming out of, we're 3 years away from COVID now. I am starting to see a lot more of the market, like innovation kind of went away a little bit during COVID. We're seeing some of the fallout from that with some of the net new things, not quite showing up. And obviously AI, ML, and chat GPT starting to take over some of that. But we're seeing consolidation, and we're seeing kind of a return back to the basics of security again. Right, we've seen a lot of migration from old style data centers and what we used to call fog, right? So cloud and on-prem at the same time type stuff, to more push towards cloud pieces. And they're starting to look at the budgets on, well, did you do it right the first time? Like, you spent a ton of money putting all these things out there, and you still got popped. So now that you're in a transition phase, and we're starting to see more of these platforms start to show up, all right, what are you going to do different this time? Like, how are you going to change your authentications? How are you going to change your connections? Did you learn the lessons? And I ultimately think that's a really healthy thing for boards and CISOs to get good at.
Well, you brought up COVID, right? And COVID shifted the entire market and the entire landscape of the threat landscape in which we monitor as professionals, right? The work from home environment is a very different logging environment than that which is the corporate prox card, swipe in, open door, jiggle mouse, light up screen. It's a very different world now. And alongside that, I think we started to see the prevalence of the endpoint, the authentication, the certain types of layers became much more important. And I think in
Yes.
2023, we also saw the net effects of that in some of the breaches that we saw, right? So I think these intimate correlations are very unique topics to discuss, but also they're downstream effects of things that have happened macroeconomically.
Yeah.
And so COVID changed the entire planet. I mean, I don't know if this is the word we want to say on the podcast, but nobody made more money than the endpoint providers in COVID,
That
right?
Yeah.
It's a true statement.
And-
I mean,
and-
can't get away from it.
And you're right. The some of the big breaches this year, it was get in by getting credentials through that single sign-on MFA solution, and
Yeah.
then the first thing these attackers did, go disable the EDR tool,
Turn it off.
Yeah.
and now we have free reign. Those have made for really, really interesting points of attack. It's the security tools being the point of attack now, not hiding from the security tool. You're just going right at it.
So what
strength on
do we think
strength.
changed in 2023 on maybe the social engineering aspect of things? Do we think that we saw some unique strategies there that maybe we need to learn from? And that this is one that I think is worthy of study, no?
I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying, and I'm certainly open to different opinions. I think one of the things for me is, and I find it interesting, the CSF is being updated in 2024. Sorry, I'm talking future a little bit, to add a sixth function, and that is governance. Right? So identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and governance. And I think that's a reaction to the fact that we went back into sort of our technology turtle shell. The technology was how we were solving for security, and we forgot about the process a help desk employee has to follow for resetting the password, and the process for deciding we're going to add new credentials to something in the process for. And I think the social engineering happened. Number one, it surprised people that the social engineers in these cases were such good English speakers, had such good diction, had such good, could impersonate somebody in Las Vegas looking to change their password. And nobody went, gee, you don't sound like you're really one of our employees. You don't sound like a Bob Smith. Okay, great. So there were some of those easy fallacies that they snuck past really, really fast.
Well, we'll see that with AI as well. I mean, impersonating voices, impersonating video, impersonating emails, right? And tones of emails, where
Adjective use, the whole thing, language structure.
You're not going to have that spidey sense of something's off about the grammar in this phishing email, right? And then you look closer at the URL you're about to click on. So the email is going to look perfect. Everything's going to look perfect. The landing page that you go to put in your credentials is perfect. Even more so than it has been over the years. One thing in 23 too, I saw, going back to 2020 and the craziness that was, is the convergence of the platforms a lot. We saw a lot of M&A activity, late 20, 21, 22, 23, with Cisco and Splunk, and the convergence of the platforms away from the best of breed kind of choices where you have a mishmash of things. And I think security leaders are looking to, simplify their stack.
You have to
do more with less,
because of some of the budget things that we've been talking about. But they are getting downward pressure because the board wants to understand more of a single stack. They want to really try to put their eggs in one basket to a point of, hey, this is, frankly, we're always looking for a throat to choke. So we're going after that singular vendor, that singular marketplace. Like, these are the ones that are putting a lot of pressure.
It's calculated risk reduction, and it's the economic buying pressure coming right back again. And to your point, having a single avenue at which the risk framework that you're managing your business under, you're eliminating risk. And so, to your point, I think the AI ML piece of 2023 might have been the most interesting thing of the entire year. Is it moved from being buzzword bingo, RSA Black Hat booth material to actionable, Gen AI structures. And I think, as we look at security, there are hundreds of use cases now for this. And I think the entire market has just inundated itself with AI talk. But it's very clear to me now that it is no longer a buzzword. We are absolutely there. I think that there was an incredible amount of discussion about who's going to launch first. But what we have not seen from the 2023 AI ML launches is the effectiveness, the
Yes.
improvement of the programs. What did you, so you launched it, you dropped it. What did it do for your business? And I think that's where I'm at with it, which is it's there, it's real. We're building it now, but how is it working
Yeah.
for you?
Well, I think it's
How is it
still
solving more of
we're
those problems?
still at the almost the very peak of the hype cycle here, though, right? And I believe in the hype cycle on stuff like this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Shout out to Gartner, I guess. But we're at that peak.
Take us
I
into
think,
that valley of despair, Bill.
but I think right. It's one of those things where the hype is still, this is going to solve world hunger.
Yeah.
And we're right. We've got folks working on this. I know you guys are intimately involved in a lot of what we're doing on that here at Deepwatch, but it's the incremental improvement. Yes, there's a great leap forward on this one thing, but as we look a little bit more broadly, that was a nice step and a much bigger chain of things. I'm looking forward to 2024 being a tempering of some of that, real outcomes, real actual useful
Show me
outcomes.
moments.
But it's not going to solve world hunger, but it'll bring me my coffee.
So
that's good.
here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. Like what I am hearing from AI is a lot of talk still. I do not see it actually having an impetus on the business, either in an effectiveness or efficiency zone, which translates to margin. We have for the last 4 or 5 years talked about the number of open roles in cybersecurity that are not being filled. You got to wonder about the AI ability to lever into that and to start to maybe adjust that number. Do we need as many people if we have automated efficiencies? And as a finance guy, I want the margins, right? I think it's the margin improvements, right?
I think, though, the other thing that we're doing is we're, over the past year, AI has meant LLM.
Yeah.
Right.
And
it's much more than that.
And I mean, there's been AI in security products since somebody coined the phrase. I mean, let's recognize we're kind of really talking about LLMs right now. We're overusing the generic term AI.
Yeah.
And I think that's skewing the behavior too.
23 felt to me with the advent and release of the AI products a lot like when user behavior analytics became a thing like 10 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now it's just a tool in the toolbox, right? You have risk scoring capabilities, you have entity scoring capabilities, some sort of DLP, right? All these things for me are a tool in a toolbox to build a security program with, not a silver bullet or an end-all be-all answer for cybersecurity.
I think you got a good point on that one, because I mean, we looked at UEBA and other behavioral components. It started, it got really hype, really big, and it was going to be, well, we don't need to worry so much about individual detections. We're just going to map what everyone does, and then when they go outside of their mean, well, then we're going to alert on it. And obviously, everyone goes outside of their mean all the time because we're humans. That's what happens. And very shortly, I think we can all agree that UEBA became less of an individual product and got really kind of sucked into or became a component of risk-based capabilities or other. It's a nit or a button within another feature set or another platform. Not to get into predictions, but do we think that AI/ML will follow that same path, or is it going to still remain kind of its own outside piece, specifically as it applies to security? Let me be very clear.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Let's just condense that down. To Bill's hype cycle curve analogy, I don't know that I think we're at the top yet personally, because I don't think we've had the show me moments yet.
I've been wrong before.
Well,
It'll happen again.
I'm not making you wrong, and I'm not certainly out to be right. But I will say this: I think we do have a lot of learning left in the space. If you back out of the AI discussion, what I don't hear enough in the space is the competency of true machine learning development. You want to build true AI, you really need to talk about the ML layer at which the work is done, the actual work is done. And I think that's, as I talk to a lot of folks, I ask questions, and this is one of the ways in which I engage with, are you actually building something, or are you using something that's already been built by a different provider? How are you leveraging into it? Is it
Yeah.
working for you? I think we're still yet to see the show me moments.
Yeah, that goes back to the convergence talk. I think we'll see a lot of convergence. I like the term co-pilot that Microsoft's using,
Yeah, makes
right?
sense.
Because it's the angel on your shoulder that's going to tell you you're doing the wrong thing or something, for a help desk person
Mhm.
who gets that social engineering call that says, "Hey, you're going outside of the bounds of being able to reset this password and reset MFA."
Lane change alert.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the AI will tell you my spidey sense is going off, even if you're human. You're having a bad day, you're not focused, and we're all human, right?
Well,
Even at
it-
scale.
Well,
Yeah.
on that one, like we talked about convergence, and one thing that I did see happening, and it's one of those, I'll call it an unhappy accident that we've seen recently, is okay. You talked about AI being able to better impersonate from the tone of the emails, from the obfuscation, or just simply impersonation of websites and drop pages. But then you have a lot of what we saw happening in some of these social engineering attacks with MFA components based off of SIM swaps,
Yeah.
right? And so is it, to me, it's a convergence of an unhappy accident of we have most of our major cell phone providers moving away from physical SIMs and going into eSIMs, and now we have AI being able to better impersonate or these phishing attacks or these attempts to go to our employees, to go to the people who are getting those access, who do have the MFA tokens. Or is that a something that we need to look at on maybe more going back to old RSA physical tokens?
Yeah.
Is AI going to help us self-educate our users when they're away from the physical realm and they're on their phones?
I think it goes back to the creativity of the threat actor, right? We're going to see that they're going to know what AI mechanisms we use to pop up those things about, hey, you're giving your token to something you're not supposed to give it to, right? So they'll come up with a creative way, whether it's a soft token or whatever someone's using for MFA that's not SMS, right?
Yeah. Please,
To
please, for everyone,
to work
do not
around
use
it.
SMS, MFA. Like, let's move
Anymore.
past that. Let's
It's
find
done.
something else.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, some financial institutions, some smaller ones especially, are still using those classic SMS.
I would also say turn on
email.
MFA.
Yeah, start at the
let's
basics.
Start with turning on
Start there
MFA,
first. Right.
and then
Could we get that on my
and then
Chipotle
move
account?
away from it. Yeah, so they will come up with creative ideas based on what they know we're using to
Mhm.
combat that, right? You
Yeah.
see it with phishing. I mean, you think that they don't look at Fish Me and know before and all the things that have come out with, for social engineering training. The attackers look at that stuff too, right? And they know what training our employees are getting. So they work right around it. There's always going to be a gap. There's always going to be something that we miss. And hopefully AI can fill that gap. We definitely have a people shortage in cybersecurity and a skills shortage, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. I see 23 as being transformational, and in that, to your point, it stopped becoming
Mainstream.
it stopped becoming a buzzword.
Yeah.
And started being real. And we'll see the next few years exactly what the outcomes are for the products that are being built and the features that are being built.
I think it'll be the thing that accelerates the mergers and acquisitions space in cyber.
Yes.
I think it is going to be one of the impetus for accelerating combined value sets that have yet to be seen. I think I'm going to be this. I think this will age well.
Mark the tape.
Because
Yeah.
there's so much that's been created but lives in a siloed set of values. And I think as you look at what's really neat is you look at the combination of the hyperscalers. Well, we haven't said the keyword here, AWS, yet and what they're doing, right? But the amount of innovation happening at AWS and the amount of things that are coming out of AWS that no longer makes something else needed. It's going to change the value stream of what's out there. I think you're going to see, this is not a prediction, but I did predict this in 2023 and I did not get it right. I think you would have thought you were going to see more M&A activity in the space. and I don't think we saw as much as we were expecting. Maybe it's 2024. I just might have been a year early.
I applaud you for tying it back to 2023. That was fantastic.
Well, it's a bet I would have made, and
Yeah,
I you know,
yeah.
but also it's because if you look at the innovation in our space, what's been the most innovative thing that's been released in cybersecurity in the past 3 years?
Past 3?
What would you say?
That's a big question.
It is. What would you say? Take your time.
I hate to say it. I think we've been kind of flat.
I think we
past
have
3
too.
years.
Yeah.
And if you
'Cause I
truly look
think-
at it, you have.
I think we were
the
still
only one I'll give you that I've heard at least move the needle beyond the whole Chat GPT or LLML concepts is I'll give the name, like Rumble, like that external scan capability, which is really a callback to an old component, but in 2022, like they did move the needle. Like that was a very interesting technology that people were starting to pick up and use, and is continuing to use a good piece. But I think to the point that you would make is that in what we looked at learning now with ML and other capabilities, that is part of a data set that needs to be collapsed down as we
Yeah.
start looking at hyperscale components.
Yes.
It feeds it. It didn't necessarily get in the way.
No offense to any of the innovative, and I think they're run zero now, right?
Yeah, I use the
HD
old
would-
name.
HD
sorry.
would want
you to say that.
Yeah. HD, sorry, HD. I apologize. Yeah.
And you know, I look at a company like Gray Noise and the innovation that they're doing. But for me, to your point, the rhetorical question is like, I think we're just building better mousetraps at this point. There's no something that you have to have. Like the way I look at it is, if you're truly innovating, there's a product that was released that everyone's saying you have to have this to protect your organization, right? The MFA products, the duos and pings and those types of things. It's like, it doesn't matter which one you prefer, but you have to have something like that. And, you know, the cloud providers didn't have it at the time. And you had to bring in kind of a third party best of breed to solve that problem. I don't think a problem has been solved in the last 3 years.
I think that's what I'm getting at as well, is that we're waiting on one of these moments. And I don't know if it's going to be a new, I mean, the SolarWinds moment was a heck of a moment, right?
Oof.
We had the aha
Yeah.
moment for supply chain.
Yeah.
Change the structure of discussion largely in the entire planet for all of us as professionals in the space. And it opened our eyes to the collective risk that's involved in a lot of our intermingled and commingled tech. But I think that's a part of where I sit back and I think like 2023, interesting year. You know, one question I would ask this crew is, when did OCSF get launched? Was that 2023 or before? Because that
It's old. It's
older than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it kind of, to me, it became mainstream in 2023 as we started studying fields and what's happening with standardization of
Yeah.
fields. Like that could be a huge needle mover, but it's not really that.
It's not in front
You
of
don't fall
people.
in love with
Yeah,
a framework,
yeah,
right?
It's not the next
I do.
generation
Well,
firewall.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
you're
you're a little
EDR.
different.
Well, I mean, to that point, like you're talking about a conversation of, is it something on your laptop and something that you're seeing a blinky light or you're seeing something
Yeah.
go off, or not to denigrate its capabilities, what we want to see or what it can do for us, but you're reorganizing your spices. Like it's helping you put things in appropriate places and know where they are and go for it. It's not but again, to kind of go back to that point, it's not the sexy things that are actually always going to have the major impacts.
Right.
And I do think it can, now in our larger data world, I do think it's going to have a much larger impact than we expect.
Bringing it all the way back to where we started, I think we kind of know what we need to do now. It's just how we position it to businesses, right? Isn't just the security geeks have us covered, you know, the purple team, bunch of hackers, you know, in the basement are running the firewalls anymore. It's the board level decisions being made with major budgets and major shifts in both macro and verticals and micro with enterprises, right? So the consistency in response to a breach that we were talking about with the SEC,
Yeah.
it all fits in because you're not going to be able to just pawn it off as, well, we have a security team that handles that.
Yeah.
It's got to be embedded in the business, and security needs to be part of what you do as a business, whether you sell hammers or you make cars or you're a software shop.
or the other one that I think is impactful there, to kind of go back again to last year, and kind of summarize a little bit as this conversation up, has been security obviously needs to be embedded everywhere, but in some places we haven't really thought about the business risk or the operational risk that was associated to it. And the board, like we've kind of talked about, they're starting to push some of those things down. And so, like you were talking about hammers or nails, but what if you were to go through and talk about cleaning supplies that impacted
You
all of
wanna
us
go there.
majorly, right? So but that was an unexpected risk and a very, very major financial hit that they're still taking on the books and will be taking on the books, at least from their last filings, I believe it through the middle of this year, if not longer.
Yeah.
'Cause it's a long running hit.
Mhm.
So can we look at those larger discussions now that we want to put our big boy pants on or big girl pants on in security around talking to the board, understanding risk at a better level. And I do think, kind of come back to LLMLs, I think that's the thing that's going to move this and move the market forward and move the industry forward is a better, more communicable way of talking about risk and the different factors that get played into it. And what is the not just the security guys have it or the security minions in the basement have it, but does the business understand what they actually have
Yeah.
and what's the impact on the edges?
And I think that leads into the discussion of, is it in your DNA? Is it your bread and butter to do cybersecurity for a business, right? And when do you start looking at trusted advisors, bringing in outside experts, bringing in folks who are doing this at scale, versus just building a SOC in your own business or building your own GRC platform and team, right? I think those discussions are going to have to be made, especially as budgets are getting shrunken, as talent challenges keep coming up, right?
Yeah, the apex between risk mitigation and risk transfer, I think, is becoming much more of a discussion at the board level. And I think it is the most healthy discussion for practitioners in our space, because then you start to talk about the actionability of managing the environment and whether or not you want to own the risk. And if you don't want to own the risk, how the heck you're going to transfer it out. And the
Yes.
accountability involved in that is very much financially implicated. It is strategically implicated, but it also requires you to understand the ecosystem of what you're accepting. And I think that's the educational component that started to change a little bit. That risk discussion is very hard to put metrics to, by the way. Right? We still struggle with
Yeah.
with the visualization,
Yeah.
the tangibility of touching risk and understanding, did you get the risk qualification? Did you score the risk correctly? I still think we have some area to improve in that
Yeah,
quite a
we-
bit.
Well, I mean, there are no real actuarial tables.
That's where I was going to go.
on-
Where's the actuary for security? Like, does
yeah,
that,
you it's so hard
It's
to
a f-
quantify. I mean, it was just a study I saw that came out on the impact on stock price after a breach.
It's
long
negligible.
term. Yeah, and it
Yeah.
really doesn't impact stock price, but what it does is impact brand trust. It impacts the business at bottom line for how much it costs to come back to, right? If you make cleaning products, your resilience and recovery to a cybersecurity breach is not part of what you do every day.
Nope.
Like, you want to put cleaning products in the hands of your customers, and tech is how you do that, right? But I think the acceleration of tech integration has caused some of these traditional businesses, even financial institutions, manufacturing. We haven't even touched the subject of OT, IoT, and I don't know if we want to go there.
I think we're going to pass. That's another hour.
That's a whole nother can of worms.
Next
But,
recording.
Yeah.
As these businesses start to have accountability from either regulation, government oversight, I look at the Colonial Pipeline breach as kind of a seminal moment for, hey, we as the government are going to come in and tell you, here's the bare minimum of what you have to do, and if you don't do this, you're going to be in violation of our regulations.
And
right?
please stop stumbling over that bare minimum.
Yes.
The only thing I want to bring up real quick, just to kind of run through because it is something that I saw that kind of goes to the cleaning supply, or it goes to some of the social engineering components. But we saw just at the very end of last year the government activity and the FBI going back and forth with a known ransomware provider, right? And then the ransomware provider coming back and basically saying, "Hey, we're taking the gloves off." Like there's been a little bit of honor among thieves to a point in some of these malware providers and the businesses that they are running. And so it to me, one thing that I saw that was very, very interesting that I'd like to get y'all's opinion on is the overlap, or to the stumble over security controls of, can you trust your partners? Can you trust the business partners that you're working with? Can you hold them accountable to stumbling over controls or putting the bare
Well,
minimums in
sure.
place?
Fill out the
Or-
attestation form, please.
Look, I mean, is that kind of where we're at? Like
I-
just before we
I mean,
sign the
all
waiver, before we
joking-
do business?
All joking aside, I think that is where we're at. Unfortunately, I do not believe we have a framework or an ability to do anything more than what we've seen. But I do believe that there is change ripe for that space. Yeah.
Yeah. The third-party risk management platforms that are in place just haven't been doing the job. I mean, it really doesn't actually give you a good picture of what you're doing when you engage with a third party or a vendor. So, it really, you have to have a really good set of documentation when it comes to how you're protecting your business. And if you don't have that, it's table stakes at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could take it all the way back to fun facts with Bill Bernard. I mean, 2 out of 5 CISOs have not patched Log4j. You're accepting that anytime you do business with that 40%, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to continue to be a problem. It's going to be a problem until, frankly, I think one of the key things that has to simply happen is software vendors have to proactively manage the patching of the stuff they've sold. It can no longer be, I bought your stuff, I don't know where your stuff is everywhere in my environment, and it's on me to patch it and update it. I can't keep up with that. You sold it to me, you make it work. You make it work right. And we have to convert to that. Software supply chain gets better that way. It doesn't get perfect, but it certainly gets better. And now it's about, okay, the software is all right. So now where are your controls at? And that I can still audit you on, at least kind of.
Yeah, I don't know if better's the right word. Because the first thing that comes to mind when you said that is the Microsoft key loss debacle, where I don't even know if we know yet how that happened.
Story yet untold, I think.
Right.
I think that's a much larger conversation as well, because I agree with you. I'd love to be able to roll that down or have that level of control. I just don't think the industry is going to allow that.
Well,
I mean,
Bill wants an automobile warranty
You go
with everything he purchases.
think-
then we're selling extended security warranties moving forward after this. Like,
Well, you got to wonder what comes from that need. There is clearly a need.
there is.
That could be a solution. I mean, is it one that I personally would be all that in for? I don't know, but we do. There's no impetus.
No way.
Yeah, listen.
never
There's no one to regulate that.
Right. And as a business, I go from on-prem Exchange, which I have trouble patching. It's always vulnerable. It's open to the internet. I'm like, oh, this thing's a real pain. And I'm think I'm being smart by moving to cloud-based Office 365. And then all of a sudden I get breached because Microsoft loses their keys, right? And it's like, well, I shifted risk, but it didn't make it better. It just shifted it to where, as a CISO or a CTO, I can point at Microsoft and say, they screwed up, not me.
I followed the standard. I did what I was supposed to do. That's on them, right?
I don't think that's better. I don't think that's a better way to get rid of risk long term.
I will respectfully disagree, and we can go into that in another conversation.
I think that's
Okay.
perfectly fine. I do want to end this up on a bit of a productive, like, what I've heard over all of this the entire time is patch. Be aware. and
Passwords.
patch. Passwords.
Patching.
Phishing.
Phishing
And people.
and people.
Yes.
The four
The
Ps.
four
Four
Ps.
Ps. Focus in on that. spend some time with your social media programs, helping people understand what's going on, and I'll add a C into your 4 Ps, like better communication, like across your company, across your user base, across the board. Like get better at talking about those 4 Ps,
Yeah.
and then you should be able to see some actual forward momentum.
And I'll add another C, continuous, because it actually bothers me, the Cybersecurity Awareness Month, October thing. Like, why
Year.
is it?
It's the whole year, right?
Yeah.
Am I wrong about that?
It should be. We're always aware of cybersecurity, right? Like it's a continuous thing.
Every
Why
day
is it
April
just
Fool's
one
Day.
month of the year?
Every day is April Fool's Day.
Always on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm out of Scrabble tiles. I don't have another letter to contribute. I'm sorry.
Well, all right. On that note, we really appreciate your time. Hopefully, some of this was valuable. I appreciate everyone kind of sitting down, having the conversation, and talk to you all next time.